was just a young boy when everyone told me what I should do or who I should be. Stand back, and that's just a fact that we're in episode 2 of the Vince McMahon Netflix docu-series titled Heat. And I'm telling you, the lore just keeps getting deeper and deeper here. And man, it's crazy. I'm going to try to be a bit more concise and compact in this breakdown because my first episode of the breakdown is pretty much 40 minutes. And we're just going to try to be more compact here because the more you talk about Vince McMahon, it's like, I think it makes you a bit loony. I'm getting a bit crazy. So yeah, this episode starts off with that Stand Back music video by Vince McMahon and the WWF. And it's just crazy. You have like Vince McMahon at the tux. He's like dancing on the stage. You got Macho Man playing the saxophone. Hulk Hogan playing the electric guitar. And the lyrics and the way Vince McMahon is acting, it's basically Vince McMahon telling everybody, the media, everybody, it's like a big F you. This is how I am and this is what I'm doing. And there's even one point in the music video where you hear the Vince McMahon growl, you know, from the 2000s. He has the growl where he's like, "You're fired. Ruthless aggression." So there's a point in the music video where he has that same growl. And that might be the first occurrence of the Vince McMahon growl. So I found that pretty interesting to say the least. And then we transition into the NBC deal with WWF for Saturday night's main event, which was the odd Saturday. WWF would put on a show. It was like kind of like a pay-per-view-esque show with Hogan, Savage, all the top stars. And this was on free cable on NBC, like top channel. And imagine in the 80s, it was all about cable TV. So a huge deal for the WWF. Vince McMahon was like stoked about it and is basically regarded as a huge success. But with success also comes failures. And then you point to WrestleMania 2 they covered. And WrestleMania 2 took place in like 3 different cities. You know, LA, Chicago, something like that. And they were having like different matches in the cities. And they would like cut back to the different matches back and forth. It's basically too many cooks in the kitchen and just like so much of a mess. And it was considered a huge failure pretty much. But with failures also comes back success again. And Vince McMahon is a ruthless mofo. And even though WrestleMania 2 was a failure, he went full bore ahead with WrestleMania 3. Now, if you're a wrestling fan, historian, etc., you would know that WrestleMania 3 is one of the biggest events of all time in the WWF, because this was in the Pontiac Silverdome, Michigan, over 70,000 people in attendance, and the main event you had Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, and this was real American Hulk Hogan coming up to the peak of his popularity, and you had Andre the Giant, who's a legit giant, by the way. He has like a deformity called giganticism, so he is legit over 7 feet tall, 400 pounds, and he's got these giant features. And basically, the American-made babyface has to take down the giant. The tagline was, "The irresistible force meets an immovable object." So it was crazy, man. And basically, the way they booked this is, can Hulk Hogan pick up Andre the Giant? Like, can he slam the giant? And there's a bunch of failures. You know, people were wondering, can Hogan really do this? And like, I'm watching as a kid, it's like, can Hogan even pick him up? Like, is it a possibility? Like, they booked this so convincingly, and this is before the internet and everything like that, right? So finally, near the end of the match, you had Andre coming up to Hogan, and then Hogan slowly lifts Andre and hits the body slam, and the whole arena goes absolutely crazy. 70,000 people on their feet, cheering like crazy. People at home in front of their TVs like, Hogan just slammed the giant. It was such a freaking crazy moment, man. And people still talk about this moment today. Even a couple months ago, I was with my dad and he mentioned, do you remember back in the day when Hulk Hogan slammed the Giant? I can't believe, how did he do that? I can't believe it. So people are still talking about that specific moment today. And it has to be like one of WWF's most iconic moments ever. So that was a massive and pivotal moment for the WWF, Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon, etc. And it just shot WWF into the stratosphere even more, into pop culture basically. And Hulkamania, he was like such a part of pop culture. He's Vince McMahon's pet project and all that stuff. And then we go into the early 90s where Vince McMahon faces a warrior, a certain Ultimate Warrior, at WrestleMania 6 at the Sky Dome in Toronto. We have Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior for the championship, and Hulk actually put Warrior over. Warrior hit him with the splash. He got the 3 count, even though Hulk Hogan kicked out right at 3. He still put him over, and the Warrior won the championship. Now, at this point, the wrestlers were wrestling 7 times per week, and they're wrestling through injuries, through everything, all the bumps. And basically, they had to, because if they didn't, they wouldn't get paid. And not only that, if they didn't wrestle, Vince McMahon would basically put them off the card, fire them, whatever. So he was so ruthless in that regard, where you just felt the constant pressure to perform and always be on. And with that came certain drugs. And the certain drug, I'm sure everyone knows, it's the elephant in the room, is steroids, PEDs, performance enhancing drugs. And, so many people were on them back then, because not only do the PEDs help with like your physical aesthetic appearance, it also helps with injuries. It helps speeds up injury. It helps you keep going, harder. All the energy. It allows you to go while looking amazing. And that is something that Vince McMahon loves. So we had that situation. And then we turned to George Sahorian, who was a physician for the WWF. And he was basically selling PEDs to all the wrestlers in the back. And even Vince McMahon himself. So you just knew that Vince McMahon knew what the hell was happening. You know what I mean? It was just like, implied that everyone was taking them. Even though Vince McMahon didn't verbally, tell them to take them. You have to work 7 days per week throughout all the bumps, all the injuries, always be on, go. If this guy's taking steroids, that guy's taking steroids, this is the baseline for the top. What do you think everyone's going to do? You know what I mean? So that's how it was. You had the physician, George Sahorian, selling steroids to everybody, but Vince McMahon never actually told anybody to do it. But this is when the U.S. government started to infiltrate and bring Vince McMahon and the WWF to trial. Because you got to remember, around this time, we had Nixon and the war on drugs, where they deemed, all this stuff illegal. So that's when the U.S. government had the ability to take Vince McMahon to the stand, basically, to the courthouse. Now, eventually, the government offered Vince McMahon something called a plea bargain. So in this plea bargain, they asked him, just say you're guilty. When you say you're guilty, you're going to pay a certain fine. Bob's your uncle. That's it, man. But come on, we're talking about Vincent Kennedy McMahon here. The guy's insane. So he's like, I'm not doing that. I'm not giving it up. So Vince said, no, I'm going to keep fighting. And during this trial, after that, there's a scene, like a day, where Vince McMahon comes to the trial in a neck brace. And he claims that he's in the neck brace because he had neck surgery the day before, something like that. But the ironic thing is, In pro wrestling, when someone gets injured, it doesn't matter. They get injured their elbow, they'll be wearing a neck brace. So Vince McMahon pulls a pro wrestling gimmick to garner sympathy by wearing a neck brace in the courthouse. It was just so absolutely ridiculous and off the wall. Just like the Stand Back music video, but in a different freaking way. Vince McMahon has always been insane. Whether you like it, whether you don't, whether you hate him, whether you love him, it's just freaking crazy. And the plot keeps on getting thicker. So as that is all happening, we then turn to Phil Mushnick from the New York Post, and he's investigating the WWF. And Phil Mushnick is actually receiving letters from performers, like wrestlers from the WWF, talking about how crazy things are that are happening. And one incident being the ring boy scandal. Now, WWF had ring boys that would help set up the ring at every event. And something happened where these ring boys got molested, allegedly, by certain execs from the company, like Pat Patterson. Now, some of these ring boys were like ages like 16 years old, and you have guys like Pat Patterson basically molesting them, like grabbing them and doing other things. And it's just crazy, man. It like, how sick is that? And then you have other incidents like, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, very popular wrestler back in the day. Well, back in 1983, him and his girlfriend were staying at a hotel room, and apparently his girlfriend hit her head in the hotel room, and she had so much bleeding that she died. And it was a accident. So apparently she died. Forensic did their investigation, and they were kind of ruling it as a homicide, I believe. But Jimmy the Superfly Snuka, he got away scot-free. And what do you think? Like the Jimmy Superfly stuff, the Ring Boy stuff, this is all happening under the chairman and owner of the WWF, Vince McMahon. Do you think he has anything to do with it? What do you think? Like, come on. It's like, you got to be fucking kidding me, man. Like, all the arrows are pointing towards one guy. Arrow after arrow after arrow after arrow. It is crazy. And here's the final nail in the coffin, at least for now. And we turn to Rita Chatterton. So Rita Chatterton was the first female referee for the WWF. And the way Vince McMahon kind of booked her, he booked her as like this young, hot blonde referee. And Vince McMahon also spent some private time with Rita. And allegedly, he forced her to give him oral. And then when Vince McMahon wasn't pleased with that, he then forced Rita on top of him and said, why don't you pleasure me this way, or something to that degree. I mean, it gets harder and harder to talk about these episodes, but you know what that leads to, the big R word. And then Rita ended up going on a talk show. Back then, it was called Geraldo, a very famous talk show, to tell her story, basically, her side of the story. And then Vince ended up suing Rita Chatterton and Geraldo for the whole thing like that. And you know what the funny thing is, what the kicker is? In 2023, last year, Vince McMahon ended up settling with Rita Chatterton and paid her out because Rita ended up suing him. So what does that tell you about the whole story? You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, that's it for episode 2. It's kind of a hard subject. It's like super deep, and it's called Heat. Vince McMahon, he's just pretty much an asshole, right? And that's it. Hopefully that was concise and quick enough. And that's it for episode 2. Tough one to get through. And I'll see you on episode 3. Peace.